video designed to help you get your ESL students to talk in English in class. All right, so here's the big question. Most of us have students who love to talk in class. That's not the problem. The problem is how to get them to speak in English. And this can be a real issue for a lot of teachers out there. We have a great activity planned. We want them to do something fun. We want them to interact. But when it comes time, they just don't seem to want to get to it. And they kind of avoid your eye contact. So what's the problem? Why don't they want to talk in English? Well, let's think about it. Put yourself for a second in your student's place. Now imagine that your teacher said to you to turn to your partner and discuss your plans for the weekend. Okay, no problem, right? You can tell them what you want to do this weekend. Oh, wait, just a second. You can only speak in German or Spanish or Japanese or Arabic. Go ahead. What, you can't do it? What's the problem? What do you need? Why aren't you speaking in German? Aha. So some of the reasons they don't do this, and you've probably realized right away, they don't maybe have the vocabulary, they don't know what to say, they feeling embarrassed about their pronunciation, all of these things. When you ask someone to do something they don't feel equipped to do, for whatever reason, you automatically bring up some of these feelings. So let's address some of these feelings that the students have. The first one is they might be feeling incompetent. Can they do this? Make sure that when they're about to start an activity that they say, yes, I can do this. I have the tools I need. I'm able to do it. And not only can I do this, I actually want to do this. This is something really interesting. I actually like this topic. Feelings of security. Okay, so if I'm going to do this activity, no one is going to make fun of me. And that's a huge one for humans of all ages, right? And finally, feelings of belonging and responsibility. That really, if I'm going to do this activity, my friends actually need me to do this, because if I don't speak, then this activity won't move forward, or that we can't get something done, or the game won't work. So if you address all of these feelings, you're going to find that students are much more likely to participate. So how do we do this? This is my next question. Well, I've put together a series of 9 tips that you can use in the classroom, and you can use these to look at the different kinds of activities and see if they help you out. So here we go. Here are my 9 tips. We're going to go through these one by one. Don't worry, I'll put the slide back up at the very end. All right, so the first one is to use a small group formation. Ideally in a language class, if you're getting students to speak to each other, try to do it in groups of 2 or 3 and not so much in front of the class. We like to ask questions in front of the whole class, but really to get them to interact orally in English, put them into a pair, max group of 3. And this will really help address their feelings of security and belonging. So it's okay to speak to a friend or one person next to you, but much more than to speak in front of the whole class, because nobody will make fun of you if that happens. Belonging also, if one person doesn't speak in a partner, the conversation can't go anywhere, right? So they have to do it. Great suggestion for this is the think, pair, share formation. So when you ask students to think about a question for a minute, and then share it with a partner for 2 minutes, and then share their answers with the class. Or the variation, which is think about a question, pair with your partner, and then square with another partner group. Speaking of competence and security, a lot of English teachers really like to get their students to do oral presentations in front of the class, and that can be quite stressful for adults and people who even speak English as their first language. So rather than asking students to do an oral presentation on a topic, why not think of doing it as a science fair kind of setup? So that means half the class or a third of the class takes time to sort of set up around the periphery of the classroom, maybe with some tools, and they can share their information about a topic, and then the other students can circulate with a clipboard and a list of questions to ask and do some genuine interaction, which makes the conversation a lot less formal. There's a lot more genuine interaction going on, and it's a lot less stressful because the students will have had a chance to practice and the stakes are a lot lower risk. All right, the next tip I have is to provide language support so that the students actually know what language to use. So for example, if I'd given you the task about speaking about your weekend in German, but this time I had gone through things like how to say, last weekend I did, or this weekend I want to, in German, it would have been a lot more effective, and you maybe would feel a lot more confident. So it's important to really teach students the expressions that they need, and we call that functional language, right, from the progression of learning. So things like, I think that, what do you think, I disagree with. We need to consider the kind of vocabulary that the students need to have to understand the concept or use. So what kind of words do we need to talk about our weekend? What kind of strategies can they use if they don't know a word, for example? You can say, hey, if you don't know a word, think of a way you can describe it, or point to something, use gestures, or ask for help. And finally, is there any grammar that they'll need? Make sure that they are familiar enough with some of the grammar structures if they're going to something a bit more complicated. The third tip is to practice the key expressions as a class before you do any activities. So, or at least make sure you've done it a few times before. So for example, if I were to teach you how to introduce yourself in German, I would say, wie heißt du? Ich heiß. And then, we would practice again. Wie heißt du? Wie heißt du? Ich heiß. So we practice it. I model, then we practice it together, and then they go off and do it on their own. Tip number 4, use short activities more frequently. And this is actually tied to neuroscience, and it applies to just about everything you want to teach or learn. And rather than doing one big activity once a semester or once a term, if you do several small activities much more frequently, you can benefit because you learn the skills much more quickly. So as a teacher, this means you need to plan activities for every class. So plan those speaking activities for every class and keep them short. Target time should be about the age of the student. It's just a very general target. So if your kids are 12 years old, try and keep them to about 10 minutes. Or if they are older adults, they can be a little bit longer. Focus on one key expression or task at a time. And the more focused your activity, the better your chances your students will have for success. And that really taps in again to their feelings of confidence, I can do this, and security. No one will make fun of me if I do. Tip number 5 is to provide visual cues. And this is so helpful as the students as you're walking through class and you're listening to students talk, if they don't have the right expression, you can just point to the poster, or the students know that they can look at it. So I remember when I was learning French in grade 4, my French teacher had a big poster on the wall saying, can I be excused to go to the washroom? Est-ce que je peux aller aux toilettes? So these are really important things to ask, and that really helps them feel secure. No one's going to make too much fun of me. I have that reference there. I know what I'm talking about. So you can use posters, or if you're prepping an activity, then you can think about putting words on the board, for example. This is a tip for just about everything that you do in English class, but especially for oral interaction. You really need to do some cooperative learning structures. It's really hard to do oral interaction to carry on a conversation if you're not talking to someone else. So you really need another student in the picture. And these are activities like opinions, interviews, asking students to go conduct surveys, for example, who eats their lunch in the cafeteria, solve a brain teaser puzzle together, do the science fair, we talked about that, get students to talk about a topic for 1 minute and then switch partners, kind of the speed dating. The find someone who activities, find someone who has a brother, find someone who traveled to India, find someone whose favorite color is red. You can get them to do role play. It's a bit more sustained. You can have a picture cue, so describe the picture. You can get them to do discussion circles. These are just some activities of cooperative structures. And this is one of my all-time favorites, is when students are playing games, if you can gamify your activities, sometimes they don't even realize that they're learning. And a great example of this is the card game To Go Fish. If you've ever played this, everybody gets a set of about 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 cards you choose. And the object of the game is to match up all your cards. So you need to have, for example, if you have an 8 in your hand, you need to have another 8. Once you have 2 8s, you can get rid of it. And the first person to get rid of all their card wins. And this is really great for English because you sit around in a circle with your 2 or 3 other partners and you ask each person, you can say, do you have an 8? And the other person will respond, yes, or no, go fish. And then it's their turn. Do you have a 3? Yes, no, go fish. So you can see that they're asking yes, no questions. They're not even thinking about it. They're so focused on the game. They don't realize that they've already are starting to master yes, no questions, which of course increases their interest because games are fun, belonging. They can't do this without they can't complete the game without everyone participating, and security. It's super easy because we're practicing this and it's low risk. And games are a really nice example of task-based activities. And a task-based activity really requires students to complete a concrete and specific task within a certain amount of time. If you're having issues with classroom management, this is also a great way to keep students from going off task and starting to, disrupt. So another example would be like the Guess Who game, where students sit with a partner, they get a set of cards like up here, and they have to say, they have to guess which person or creature the other person is thinking of. You can ask them to conduct a survey. As I said earlier, you can say how many people go to the school cafeteria at lunch or how many people bring their lunch. And again, that's interest and belonging. The final tip is to tap into talent. So whenever you can, try and organize the activities around things that interest students or allow them to use their other expertise. Make them feel really good. If they're not so confident about speaking in English, get them to speak about something they know a lot about. My kids seem to know everything there is to know about basketball and basketball players, for example. They can talk about that for hours, or Pokemon cards. And they can tell you all about that. Ask them to tell you about Pokemon cards or to tell their friends, so kind of like a show and tell. And you'll find that because they are getting into their own competence in another area, they're feeling like they know a lot about this and their interest, they're motivated to do it. So that's it. Those are 9 different strategies to get your students to talk in English and hopefully addressing some of the issues that underlie the reasons they don't talk in English. Thanks for listening.